that you might find in northeastern Michigan through some of the oldest rock formations on Earth in Lake Superior. And then in addition, we do have coastal wetlands with a variety of fishes and aquatic organisms. Not to the diversity and the color that you find in Caribbean locations. But still, if you're a Michigander, it's something to be proud of and to try to best understand. And being in water, I think, is one of the best venues for doing that.
Sure. What do you think some of the economic impacts are of these preserves? Do they bring an enormous amount of people to the preserve? What kind of economic impact for the community as a whole?
There's not a lot of professional studies. But when I was with the Michigan Sea Grant Extension at Michigan State University back in the 80s and early 90s, there were a few studies, and I did bring a little summary of some of those.
Okay.
The one of, I think, most importance was completed back in 1984 and 85. So we're talking 20 years ago, and obviously there's a need for more current studies, but
current data, yeah.
But in that case, an estimated 6,000 scuba divers and 17,000 accompanying non-divers visited the Alger Underwater Preserve during 1984. Alger is near Munising, Michigan, a small northern coastal community. And then an estimated 6,000 scuba divers and over 8,000 accompanying divers visited that preserve in 85. The total diving-related expenditures in the local economy were estimated at $3.4 million in 1984 and $2.4 million in 1985. Then you add additional secondary, indirect and induced impacts. And the secondary economic impacts were estimated at $6.8 million for 84 and $4.7 million for 85. That's an indication how the direct dollar that's spent from outside the community creates additional money within the community. I think this is very significant for a small northern coastal community.
Yeah, Alger, Munising is not very big.
Yes.
That's true.
And I think we've seen similar results in the other underwater preserve areas. It's just that we haven't studied them professionally.
So it's as an activity and in tourism for underwater diving. It's really, I guess, the awareness or the activity. And when you think about the Great Lakes, you don't think about going diving all the time. I would think most people think about boating or things that you would do above the water rather than items that you can do below the water. And as you mentioned, there are so many interesting things to see, not just the fish and the landscape, but possible boat or shipwrecks and things like that.
Absolutely, because these sites are hidden from plain view, the educational component is critical. Not only from the tourism side, making dive markets aware of what we have here in Michigan, but I think just as important, making our residents aware up through K-12 to adult learning.
Sure.
It's impressive just from the fact that if you look at Michigan's geographical boundaries, over 40% of Michigan is underwater. I think that kind of speaks for itself.
Sure.
And Michigan has management authority for nearly 40% of the entire Great Lakes submerged lands and overlying surface waters.
And now you probably have interaction with communities that are trying to start preserves because they see it as a wonderful way to bring tourism to the area, to make their place a destination location. How do you interact with those communities? How do you help them along?
I started down that path when I came back to Michigan after my 12-year tenure with the National Park Service. That was the connection with Michigan's Sea Grant Extension. My title was actually Underwater Preserve Specialist.
Okay.
And in essence, it's both an education process and assisting communities in research. Important place to start is, what do we have? So that involved documentation of sites. And then, of course, the tourism side of it is, what do people need within the dive markets, and how do we make those connections? I've spent time in virtually every underwater preserve community in Michigan, working with both underwater archaeologists, museum people, and the recreation and tourism side to try to answer those questions. It's resulted in a number of studies and a hope that we can better position ourselves here in Michigan as a national and international dive destination.
Sure. Now, I recently introduced a package of bills that you've kind of helped to spearhead. Why would you say that it's important to recognize the Great Lakes as a state park? Why is that so important?
Well, I think looking back to the original intention of our legislature in 1899 kind of said it all. The symbolic aspect of having the largest public park ever created in the history of the United States, I think reflects the uniqueness of that resource and how pervasive it is literally in every area of recreation and employment here in Michigan.
Sure.
From the maritime climate that on the west side of the state literally made it able to create a fruit industry, through the tourism side of that equation that we have today. So to me, the Great Lakes are the most unique single feature, geopolitical feature we have here in the Great Lakes. And I think as early as 1899 that was recognized by our legislature.
And certainly with this package of bills, we're only reaffirming what they said in 1899.
Absolutely.
And making sure that it's distinguished who's to take care of those bottomlands. That's the DNR, Department of Natural Resources. They're the managing tool for those bottomlands. A few other parts of the package that I think are significant to point out, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how you think the impact of these items might help the underwater preserve. The decal, the $15 voluntary decal sticker. How do you think that could be useful? I mean, it's a park pass, but you don't have to buy it if you don't want to buy it.
Right.
But if you want to donate to the Great Lakes, this is a way to do that.
Well, back in the early 1980s, the Michigan legislature was looking at the concept of underwater parks versus underwater preserves. In those days, if you recall, we were also in an economic downturn. So the concept of underwater preserves was chosen rather than underwater parks, which conferred an obligation by the state to provide monies. At least so goes the rationale back at that time. So communities have been at the forefront of dealing with stewardship of both the resources and the opportunities related to underwater recreation and tourism. Plain and simple, there is not a lot of monies available at the state level, at the agency level, dedicated monies to do real infrastructure in collaboration with the communities. So I am hopeful that this will provide an opportunity for recreational divers to step forth and put some money where their concerns are.
Sure.
And those concerns in my tours of the state are to, again, bring forth recreation and tourism opportunities to create more of a national and international dive destination here in Michigan.
Okay. Now, the other part of the package, hopefully, you set up the $15 park pass. That is, something that you can. It's not required. It's voluntary. Those dollars would go into what is called the Great Lakes State Park Preservation Fund. Now, how would that fund work with communities to determine what is necessary or needed